Hello, my name is Paul Healy. I'm the editor of the Roscommon People newspaper, and my guest now is Andrew Mannion, who's a general election candidate in Roscommon, Galway, for People Before Profit. Andrew, you're welcome.
Thanks, William Paul. Thanks for having me. Much appreciated.
You're very welcome. So, Andrew, you're running in the election for People Before Profit, and that's a party that has certainly got a presence and a high-profile presence in Dublin and so forth. Maybe not so much in rural areas.
No, not yet anyway.
Not yet, indeed. So before we get into People Before Profit and indeed the policies that are important to you, just maybe tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about yourself, where you're from and your upbringing and so on.
So I'm a 29-year-old support worker with the Brothers of Charity Services in Ballinasloe. Born and raised in Ballinasloe, currently living in Athlone. Can't find rented accommodation in Ballinasloe, unfortunately, which is a bit counterintuitive. You think that it'd be a lot easier to find accommodation in a small town like Ballinasloe as opposed to Athlone, but that's where we are, unfortunately, with the housing situation at the minute. I'm a trade union activist as well, so that's how I kind of got my foot in the door with politics. Was my previous job. I'd organised fellow workers of mine into Mandate Trade Union and had eventually gone out on strike looking for union recognition. That was in 2022, and then lead up to the local elections then last year, or just in the June gone by. Before Profit had approached me and asked would I be interested in running. They obviously wanted people who had some bit of a track record in organising people and building alternative power bases, I suppose, to go alongside with the politics as well, you know.
And before they asked you, had you been thinking politically? I know you were involved in the trade union movement, but were you drawn to any particular political party or not actively pushing a political interest?
No, I had been a member of People for Profit for about a year and a half or 2 years.
Right.
It was just after, basically, I think it was 2020, the end of 2020 was when I had joined PBP, and I suppose the response to the COVID pandemic had a big influence on, I don't want to say radicalising me, but basically pushing on my interest in politics. Obviously the job that I was working in, shop I was working in was open 7 days a week throughout the whole pandemic, never closed the shop once, and we were also just down the road from Portugal Hospital. So I saw a lot of things that basically kind of showed me that government that was in power during the pandemic hadn't really combated the issue as heavily as I would have liked. We saw a lot of nurses and doctors who were heavily stressed coming up to us, and obviously the kind of messaging around social distancing, masking and all that obviously had an impact on us, because we were on the front, I don't want to say we were on the front lines like nurses and doctors were, but at the same time they were putting our lives, or putting our health at risk anyway, being there 7 days a week.
At the time of COVID, during the lockdowns, did you think that the government approach was wrong, or was it just with the benefit of hindsight?
No, at the time I thought that particularly the way that they reopened in the lead up to Christmas, I thought was a bit hasty. Like, we'd heard a lot of horror stories about how the hospital was coping, not just Portugal, but hospitals around the country were coping with the COVID pandemic, and I thought they were a bit hasty, and I think it was more so to benefit business interests more so than actually worrying about the welfare of the people that of the public in general, but particularly people like us that were working on the front lines as well.
Yeah, and looking back, apart from what staff were going through, there was a lot of I suppose emotional trauma for families visiting people or not being allowed to visit people, and there was all of that. So it was certainly a very traumatic period.
Well, my grandfather passed away the week before the lockdowns were instituted, so at the time we were able to go in and see him in the hospital in Galway. But when he had passed away, his funeral took place just after the lockdowns, and we were probably one of the last funerals that we were able to go ahead with in the churches. But it was very odd experience, and like my mother and her brothers and sisters were fairly heavily negatively impacted by that. They never got any closure really, and that was at the very beginning of it. So you can only imagine what people who lost family members to COVID must have felt like.
Yeah, and I suppose we're all dealing with the fallout from COVID on a lot of levels still.
100%.
So you had joined People Before Profit. They asked you to run in the local elections in Galway last June, I think it was, of this year. So obviously you didn't get elected, but it was your first outing, and I know you made an impact from that point of view. I mean, how did you find that experience? Was it daunting putting your name before the public, and how was it experience in general?
It was good. Like it was a lot better than I had kind of expected when I had announced it, or when I said that I was going running first. There were a lot of people that had said to me like it's a big undertaking, and obviously with the political climate that we have at the minute, you weren't going to have an easy time going door to door. But from my experience, I had very little in the way of negative experiences with people. People were, I suppose, in Ballinasloe and no more than in the constituency now. PVP are a very small party and might be an unknown quantity around this neck of the woods, but at the same time, I suppose it gave me a clean slate to be able to explain to people our policies, and there wasn't any kind of baggage.
There's no baggage,
yeah. So that was a huge bonus for me. But no, I thought it was great. I enjoyed doing it. It didn't get out to canvas as much as I would have liked, given the size of the team that we had at the time. Obviously, again, small party, small machinery behind us, so we could only do as much as our small group would allow, but enjoyed it overall.
And do you think there's an appetite? We've been told there's an appetite for change, and that's been Sinn Féin's mantra for a number of years, and contributed to their high standing in the opinion polls up to maybe 18 months ago or so. So there's always been this talk about the need for change, and Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have been in power for so long. Like, is there an appetite for change, or were the local election results and Sinn Féin's subsequent decline in the polls a wake-up call for people who, of your persuasion?
It was, look, I won't get into it now, but I think when I looked at what Sinn Féin ran on in the 2019 and 2020 elections compared to what they were running on in the local elections, maybe not so much now. I think they have made some good changes in policy or in the lead up to the general election, but I think I would have put Sinn Féin at number 2 during both of those elections, but they kind of rolled back on a lot of the stuff that would have made me want to vote for them back then.
Right.
But again, look, the local elections is a very different dynamic to the general elections. There are a lot of people that are that have a lot of local issues that need to be addressed, and to be fair, there are some of the people in the establishment parties that do decent work around their local communities. But from our point of view, we feel that they've had umpteen chances to be able to fix the issues that we have right now, and I think that it's well past time that we do need change, particularly at a national level. We do need change to be able to address the wide variety of issues that we're coming up against now.
And before I get on to the issues in the election campaign, and maybe a little bit about People Before Profit as a party, what sort of presence have you got in Roscommon, Galway, in terms of foot soldiers on the ground and so on?
Yeah, look, I'd be straight with people, it's very little. I'd say if we probably had, I think I was trying to get in contact with head office to try and get a concrete number, but I'd say if it's in a couple of dozen, I'd say we'd be lucky. But look, that's the nature of it. We've obviously we've made a lot of gains.
Do you have a branch, obviously, or do you?
We have a branch. No, I would have been part of the Galway branch because I was based in Ballinasloe. I would have been based in the one in Galway, so I wouldn't have had much interaction with the branch in Roscommon. But yeah, look, that's the nature of the beast. Outside of the bigger population centres, we're always going to struggle for members. But I suppose that's what the local election campaign and this upcoming campaign is to get an alternative message out and let people know what we stand for and why we're standing for it as well.
Yeah, and you have to start somewhere, I suppose. So without putting words in your mouth, is it as much about building a base and, is it about building a base in Roscommon and Galway for the coming years and even decades?
Yeah. And again, like I suppose, the way we operate as a party as well, the politics side of it is one facet of it. Like I said in the introduction, my background would have been in trade union activism, and we believe that that's another facet of all this, that no matter what stripe of government gets put in place, workers still need to fight for their own interests in the workplaces. I recently joined CATU, which would be the Community Action Tenants Union. We're trying to get that built up as well, to be able to build up tenants' power and let people know their rights, and basically combat illegal evictions after the eviction ban was lifted. We've obviously seen the homeless figures go up, and we do need people power movements alongside representatives in their local councils or at a national level in Leinster House to do that work. It doesn't happen with just one or the other. It has to be a combination of both.
So you're all for getting people out in the streets?
Not people getting out in the streets. That is, again, if it comes to that, that's it. I mean, when we went out on strike in my previous workplace, we were looking for a very simple thing of just getting union recognition and being able to sit down and negotiate. Because we had seen, obviously, the cost of living crisis had taken a huge chunk
Total,
out of our taking a huge toll and taking a huge chunk out of our paychecks.
Yeah.
And we knew that we were worth more than we were getting paid at the time, and we said, well, look, we haven't said anything. No, we're not going looking for €20 an hour.
Yeah.
We want to sit down and we want to have a grown-up conversation with you and try and hash out something that's going to be fair for everyone. And I think that's what people need to start doing, is using their power to not be waiting on the government or TDs or councillors to be doing the work for you. Go out and fight for your own interests,
Okay, so it's kind of a dual approach. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I just wondered, people before profit have some high-profile TDs. You've got 4, I think, and you're going into the election with Solidarity, with the Solidarity Party. Mick Barry, a high-profile TD there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the combination, people before profit and Solidarity, has 5 TDs. Looking at some of your performers over the years, and they're notably capable media performers and Dáil contributors, in a way, have they got the luxury of always being in opposition heretofore, and in a way being able to point out perceived sort of injustices and inefficiencies without having to be held accountable or held responsible? I mean, are they agitators? Are they the eternal opposition?
Well, you could say that about any of the kind of perennial opposition parties. I mean, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil have been the ones that have formed every government since the inception of the state. So outside of that, like Sinn Féin have never been in power. You could call them agitators, but again, we're calling out what we see to be the government not acting in the best interests of workers and ordinary people. And again, like, we've put out costed budgets, we've put our costed alternative budgets, and our manifestos have all been very clear in what we would want to see in a potential government were we to make up a part of it. So again, until we actually form a part of the government, which we would love to do, if certain concessions were being able to make by, like, it's obviously going to be Sinn Féin that we'd be going into power with.
It has to be a government of the left, and realistically, it has to be led by Sinn Féin.
Yeah, like we've said, we won't prop up a government made up of Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil, and that's been a mantra that we've set out from the very beginning, because we just don't think that they're. I don't want to say it's a poison chalice, but we look at the way that Labour and the Greens have come out of coalition governments
in the past.
Yeah, you look at their polling numbers now, and I mean, it's plain as nose in your face that going into them, you make far too many concessions than you necessarily should need. And I think that there's enough overlap between ourselves, Sinn Féin, Social Democrats, even Labour to an extent, that we could actually make left government work. And we believe that the manifesto that we've put out is in the best interest of workers and ordinary people, and we think that it will turn the country around.
Okay, and I was having a look at your website in preparation for this interview, and it says People Before Profit wants a 32-county eco-socialist republic where working people control the wealth and the needs of people on the planet come before the profits of the few. So it is what it says in the tin, people before profit. Yeah. So in practical terms, how would that look, or how do we get to that point?
So again, going back to the kind of dual approach that we have, that we get socialists or like-minded people into positions of power in Dáil Éireann and in county halls around the country, but we also build up alternative power through trade unions, through tenant unions, through community action groups that are properly able to hold their public representatives to account. And it's a
radical change you're suggesting, isn't it?
Well, we need radical change.
Yeah.
I mean, like, the eco-socialist part of that description that you gave is probably the most pertinent part at the minute. I mean, like, we're barreling towards a world where we're going way beyond the 1.5 degrees of warming above pre-industrial levels that's been set out in the climate accords of the past. And you look at the kind of forewarnings that a lot of climate scientists are putting forward at the minute, like, we're really going down a dangerous path here. Mm-hmm. And when we think about all the issues that we're facing right now, if we don't deal with this issue in a very radical way and in a very immediate way, those problems are going to be far more exacerbated than what they are right now. And that's where we're coming from. That's why we've kind of set out our stall to say that we don't want the same people in power again, because every 5 years that we waste is just going to accelerate our decline into climate catastrophe. And that's really why we've branded ourselves as an eco-socialist party and not just as a socialist party, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And do you blame sort of, I don't know, sectoral interests or industries, or do you blame the man and woman in the street, or do you blame central government? Do you think we're too complacent on climate change, or where would you apportion the responsibility?
Like, look, every individual person has a role to play in mitigating it, and like that comes back to just basic stuff like recycling, trying to use public transport as much as you can, and being climate minded. But at the end of the day, and it's not just strictly in Ireland. I mean, I think a report that had come out, it's probably before COVID when it came out, that 70% of the carbon emissions worldwide are caused by 100 companies. And that's a very scary fact, to think that there's this small cabal of 100 companies that are causing so much damage, and that are accelerating it to a point, and that are actually like lobbying against climate policy that's actually going to try and ameliorate the situation. And like, you can see that at any of the COP summits, that there are a lot more lobbyists there than there are politicians who can actually make change, and that speaks a lot to the issue that we're facing and why it's taken so long to actually try and kick into gear all the climate policies that we need to get going.
Yeah, and I suppose this agenda that you have, or this vision that you have of the future, I mean, do you despair at the fact that the public haven't really supported it historically over the decades, insofar that the public have consistently voted Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael back in?
Look, there's no point in despairing. Like, I'll be straight with you, I spent long enough before I actually got involved in politics despairing about where Ireland was going, where the country was going. And that's just not the way to think about it. Like, you need to have a positive outlook, and you need to have a belief that the change that we need to see is possible. And like, I can't blame people for, like, people have the right to exercise their vote in whatever way they want it. And I suppose it comes down to the branding and the policies that the opposition parties have put out, that it just hasn't been strong enough to be able to overcome people's affinity to vote for Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. And I suppose it comes back to kind of a safety valve. But I think that if anything has been shown over the last 4.5 years, that safety valve is well and truly broken now at this stage.
I think there's a generational aspect to this, insofar that, in an anecdotal way, you might say that it's younger people you should be trying to get your message to, or certainly to try to recruit for your cause. And is that the case? And have you been able to engage with young people and get them interested, or is there a disconnect?
No, like the vast majority of the candidates that we're running across the country are all relatively young people, which is great. And a lot of our activist base that maybe aren't running the elections but are involved in campaigns are all very young. A lot of the people that are going out and canvassing for candidates around the country are young. But we want to appeal to everyone. I mean, we're not, again, I suppose younger people right now are a lot more enthusiastic to get out and start getting politically active, because they're the ones that have been at the forefront of a lot of the issues that we're seeing right now and that have bared the brunt of it, particularly with the housing crisis. We want to appeal to everyone, but again, the younger people, we seem to be gaining a lot of traction with younger people, which is great, but we have to now back that up with, hopefully, if we were able to make ground in the general election, that we back up all of our talk.
And is social media a positive tool for you in getting your message out and engaging with people, or is it both a positive tool and also something with negatives as well, or how do you feel about that?
I suppose it depends on the social media platforms that you're using. Like, a lot of the platforms that I would have engaged with in the local elections and in the general election have been fairly positive. You get a few people that'll come out and give you a bit of abuse, but particularly X, I find now, is just kind of a waste of time, really.
It seems to be going downhill, doesn't it?
Yeah, but social media has been great. It gets the message out to a lot more people. Some people might be alienated by it, but I think for the most part, it's been able to inform people a lot on just smaller things that people might not notice. It gives a little bit more airtime to stuff that the media might not be covering or might not have seen. And I suppose it's worked well for us that we've been able to get a good social media presence out there, and we've become fairly popular on it. But again, that doesn't automatically translate into votes on polling day, But it on the whole, I think it is great. Just as long as people are.
Yeah, some of the discourse, I suppose, some of the comments and some of the abuse is a concern. And we've been talking to other candidates about this, and the sense I'm getting it's a sweeping generalization, but people aren't confident that anything much can be done because it's been an issue now for years, but the big companies don't seem to be it's not as if they're being held to account, or it's not as if they're changing their approach, and it just seems to be a real issue, abuse online.
Yeah, and look, misinformation, huge issue. To be fair to some of the social media companies, they have put in mechanisms where fact checks can be done on it.
Yeah.
But again, it's a case of like the toothpaste is out of the tube. Like the misinformation flies around a lot easier than the actual hard truth, because it's usually a little bit more difficult and more complex to explain what's really going on. And unfortunately, right now, particularly around a lot of the stuff around immigration, the kind of misinformation is spreading so quickly, and there's just no kind of means to counteract it effectively other than standing in front of people on the doors and laying it out.
Articulate your case, yeah.
Exactly.
You're right about the misinformation, but the abuse that people are getting and that election candidates are getting, and maybe in particular in recent years, female election candidates, misogyny and so forth. I mean, isn't that a real concern?
Huge. And like we've seen it, Breach Smith, one of our best TDs, consistently gets degraded. Strictly on the basis that she's a woman. The likes of Paul Murphy, Richard Boyd Barrett, and Gino Kenny get their fair share of abuse as well. But a lot of the stuff that Breach gets is fairly gendered. I've seen it with the Social Democrats. Holly Cairns has gotten a lot of it recently. And like Catherine Martin, the list goes on and on. So it is a real issue. But again, I suppose for X, taking away their moderation team was always going to lead to that. But yeah, I don't really know what way you go about fixing that. The companies seem to be fairly kind of standoffish when it comes to trying to regulate abuse of political candidates. So again, I suppose it's up to them, and I suppose it's up to people in government to actually start holding them to account.
So Andrew, if we get into the issues, and obviously there's loads of issues locally and nationally. One of the more prominent ones is relates to housing. I know that People Before Profit is advocating for more social and public housing and so forth. Maybe if you tell us a little bit about what your policies are there, and also what numbers you have in mind and how you think that can be achieved.
So we've advocated for a state construction company to be instituted and to be capitalised by the money that we've gotten from the Apple tax settlement. We believe that the market-driven and profit-driven mode of building houses has been shown not to be effective, particularly in the last 5 years, and even going back as far as the end of austerity, really. We want to see more social and affordable housing being built. Also, the amount of houses that we have vacant and derelict in this country also needs to be addressed. We've over 160,000 properties that could be homes for somebody sitting idle. That's a huge issue for us, because in terms of sustainability, the most eco-friendly houses that we can get on stream are the ones that are already built and in situ. So we want to see a proper vacancy tax being brought in, and for the government and local authorities to CPO vacant and derelict properties that have been sitting idle for far too long, and bring those into use. Because again, we don't believe that people sitting on housing waiting for the site or the house itself to appreciate, and for that to be used as a vehicle to just appreciate value. We don't think that's the way that we should be looking at housing. We should be looking at housing as it is, as a home, as a shelter for someone to live in. And particularly as we've seen the homeless figures go up and up, and people living at home with their parents, and people couch surfing, people living in overcrowded or cramped accommodation. We need to see those houses be brought back online as quick as we can, alongside building social and affordable homes as well.
And how many social and affordable homes in a given year would you be aiming for?
I think the plan that we'd set out in the cost of alternative budget and the manifesto, I think, is 50,000 a year, if I'm remembering correctly.
Okay. We won't hold you to the last 1,000 anyway. I suppose getting tradespeople and builders is another issue as well.
Yeah. Now, we've seen, again, there are conflicting reports coming out. I know the Trades Federation have come out and said that we have the capacity to build, I think 60,000 homes is what they've said. That's probably a little bit over ambitious, but at the same time, I think the reason a lot of tradespeople have been kind of pushed out of Ireland and made go abroad is that they don't have secure knowledge that they will have work consistently. And we think that having a state construction company where we can also try and tie in with getting apprentices in and getting them trained and having developments of social and affordable housing there that they know that they'll have work, they know they're going to be trained appropriately, and they'll get fair contracts, fair wages and fair conditions. And we think that needs the kind of attractiveness of that work, and knowing that you'll have a secure job is what's going to bring tradespeople back to Ireland, hopefully. But again, that remains to be seen.
And just on an anecdotal level, your own experience in Ballinasloe is that you couldn't get accommodation?
No, so I had moved out of home in Ballinasloe in 2021. I had looked for accommodation in Ballinasloe, couldn't find anything appropriate, and had to go to Athlone to try and find a house, which, as I said from the outset, is a bit weird that I have to go to a town that's nearly twice the size of Ballinasloe to go and find a house. But as I was saying before the interview, if I hadn't gotten that house, and I've been obviously keeping an eye on Daft and keeping an eye on the different websites that are advertising rentals coming up, I'd probably still be living home with my parents, because there just hasn't been enough houses coming online. Even the ones that are there, probably out of my price range, or they're just not of a standard that I'd be willing to.
And this is contributing to, I suppose, to young people, highly qualified young people in most cases, emigrating, isn't it?
Well, my sister, along with probably a dozen of her friends from Mary I, are all fully trained teachers, have all emigrated. I think out of her group of friends, I think there's only one of them left in the country now. And she's been back. She emigrated 2 years ago. She's been back twice, but I don't think there's anything that's really attracting her to come home. The same issues are still coming up. She can get a job anywhere she wants in rural Ireland, but she just can't find a house there. And even she can get a job, she can get a job in Dublin, but can't rent. And that's really what's kind of holding her back, is that she can't see a viable place in Ireland to be able to settle down with a good job in a house that she knows is going to be secure in tenure.
So while every case differs, this is not just people going abroad for life experience and for the excitement of it. It's very much also to do with cost of living here and so on. Right.
And again, like Australia, not the cheapest place in the world to be living either. But again, it's what the value you're getting for your wages. Like, she's gotten a fully contracted job now, and she can live in the middle of the city a lot more comfortably than she would be if she was trying to rent in Dublin on a teacher's salary now.
Yeah. And just before we finish on housing, the position of your party is a state construction company with more social and public housing, and many. I know there are other aspects to your housing policy which are people can see online. Banning vulture funds from purchasing multiple homes is an interesting suggestion amongst your policies, because obviously vulture funds have bought up whole pockets of land and properties in some instances, but not actually release them to the public, as it were.
Yeah.
But I mean, is that just a populist idea, or is that actually workable? I mean, can you ban vulture funds from purchasing multiple homes? On what grounds could you ban that?
Well, I mean, we haven't given it a try. We've been calling for it, and I think some of the other parties have been calling for it as well. And it's not just vulture funds. I mean, if you look at the development of houses outside Dublin Airport, Michael O'Leary's bought up a nice little company town for himself. That happened a good few months ago now, and those houses are still sitting empty. So it's about who these houses are going to. It doesn't matter if it's vulture funds or if it's going to.
But you can't ban Michael O'Leary from buying something, can you?
No. Oh, well, with the money that you're not going to be able to. He's going to be able to. He's going to be able to put forward however much money he wants to, and that's the problem, that these vulture funds and
wealthy people
are able to just buy up these houses, because people are obviously short of money, given the cost of living crisis, and they can just outbid the ordinary person for these houses. And again, it goes back to the kind of canard of thinking that a house and housing in general is supposed to be seen as a commodity or as an asset to derive profit from. And again, that's just completely counterintuitive to what we believe as a party.
Right, but as a slight diversion from talking about issues, just for a minute, if people before profit are returned with X amount of TDs, and if a left-leaning government isn't achievable, and if Fianna Fáil stroke Fine Gael or Fine Gael stroke Fianna Fáil are at the heart of the next government in the prospective coalition talks, why not go in with them and try to achieve some of this change? Clearly, your policies aren't in tandem with theirs to a large degree, but you could argue for some of your policies to be included. Why not do that instead of, if you can't get in with Sinn Féin and others, instead of 5 more years in opposition?
Too many red lines. And I mean, a leopard doesn't change its spots, and we've seen that through.
But could a leopard not change a few of its spots at least?
It's not enough. And again, their ideological way of thinking is completely counterintuitive to what we believe. And I mean, that's on multiple different fronts. Like when we look at privatization of public services, again, it's something that we've been calling for to be reversed. I mean, you look at electricity prices. When the ESB was publicly owned, we had some of the lowest electricity prices in Europe, ended up being privatized. Now we're in a situation where we are paying some of the highest rates for electricity in all of Europe, and goes to trade union power. And that's a huge thing for us, is that they don't want to see, again, the 1990 Industrial Act, if you go and read it and see that the concessions that were made at the time, is completely hamstrung unions, and they want to see it that way. They don't want workers to have that voice or be able to build that power. And that's why we don't believe that we would ever be able to go into government with them and actually be able to make progress, because we've seen time and time again through some of the smaller parties who've gone into coalition with them that they've had to just completely give up on any of the policy. Like the Greens are a perfect example of it. We've made very little headway in terms of climate policy while the Greens have been in, and that was their big thing. We can go in, we can actually make change. We can force Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil to concede to us and actually make good progress on climate, and we just haven't seen it happen because they just get drowned out. And that's why we feel we don't need to, or we shouldn't be going into power with them.
Okay, let's move on to a few more topical issues here in Roscommon, Galway, and across the entire country. I suppose immigration is a really hot topic. Are people before profit very much advocating no limits on immigration, very much advocating an open policy, opposition to deportation, embrace all comers? Is that your position?
Well, look, we want the international law to be followed on allowing asylum seekers and international protection applicants to come into the country. I mean, for the longest time, Irish people have emigrated to all corners of the world, and like, I don't, like, just on a personal note, like, I'm not a very wealthy person. I work a normal job. I earn a decent enough wage. I'm privileged enough to be living in a country where I don't have to worry about having to uproot my whole family to escape persecution. But if I was just unlucky enough to be born in a different part of the world, or if I was unlucky enough to have been born at the outset of the famine or during the multiple recessions we had at the beginning of the inception of the state, that would have been the case. And Irish people faced a lot of racism when they went abroad first, particularly when they went to America. But we've done it, and I think we have an obligation, not only under international law, but we have an obligation, considering our history, to try and welcome these people in and give them an opportunity to escape the persecution or escape the political and economic instability that they're seeing in their home countries. Because it's not a decision that someone makes very flippantly. I mean, a lot of people that do come into this country have made extremely arduous journeys to be able to get here and to get to other countries on the continent. And it's not something that is just decided overnight that, yeah, Ireland seems like a handy place to go. We'll go in and get a free house. We'll go and get a few bob off the social welfare. That's not the main reason that people leave. It's a huge decision for them to be able to uproot their whole lives and move to a completely different country where they don't know the language, they don't know the culture. And like we saw with, after a lot of the Eastern European countries gained access to the EU, the same arguments were made back in 2003, 2004 when they came in. And now they've been able to assimilate into Irish culture, and they think themselves as dual citizens, that they have their links back to their own country, but they also see themselves as Irish now. And that will end up happening. You will get people who will naturalise. But we have to give people an opportunity to be able to escape there. If their asylum claims don't meet the threshold, they can be sent back. But I think we have to give people the chance, and we have to follow the international law around that as well.
Okay, so rather than hardening our position on immigration, you'd like to see it softened, if anything. But is it the case that the powder keg element that we're seeing all across the country, is that as much to do, not so much with people coming in inverted commas, but more with how they're being accommodated?
Well, so in Ballinasloe, we have a newly opened development up in Poolboy that's housing Ukrainian refugees. When that was announced first, there was a little bit of discontent with people in Ballinasloe considering the size of the development. There were multiple public meetings held, and the group that had ran these meetings came back with a counter proposal to reduce the amount, because they understood that having, I think it was 96 houses at the outset, it was going to be a lot. It was going to put a lot of pressure on the public services that were already heavily strained in Ballinasloe, being straight about it. But a counter proposal was put in for 63 houses, and that's the way that it should be dealt with. If people have issues with the stress that's going to put on public services, that's fine. But again, we need to point the finger at the people who put us in that position where we don't have the public services that we need, and that's been down to the government. In the cases of housing, we just haven't been able to get vacant and derelict houses back online. We haven't been able to build houses at the rate that we need them. We haven't got the funding for our hospitals. We're not able to retain staff. We can't get GP places. We can't get dentist places. That's nothing got to do with people coming in seeking asylum. That's been down to a political choice by the parties in power to not fund those services. And that's why
I get the distinction. But do you have an issue with hundreds of male only arrivals in a small rural area?
Well, I think that, like, again, the question needs to be asked. I personally don't. There are people that are going to have concerns, but again, whether they're founded or not is a different question. But again, when I see people talking about why is it all males coming in and trying to go down that route, again, you have to kind of look at the root causes of it. If you're someone who's coming from a war-torn country or somewhere that's completely politically unstable, and you have to make this huge journey, who's going to make that journey first? Is it going to be the women and the kids? More than likely not. They're not going to uproot them, put them in jeopardy. It's going to be the males that are going to come first. And that's, again, that's the nature of it. But I suppose it comes down to the government kind of interacting with the people more.
And planning in advance and so forth.
But from what we saw with the development of Ballinasloe, got a very kind of cobbled together meeting with the OPW. I wasn't there at that particular meeting, but it was described to me in a meeting following that, that the OPW and the various stakeholders from government departments came down, but it was very much so kind of hidden away, wasn't publicised enough. And to my mind, I think the government parties are more than happy for people to be blaming asylum seekers for the issues rather than actually pointing the finger at their missteps in terms of policy as well,
Okay. And just looking at your policies for the forthcoming general election, Andrew, I see a section on women and gender equality. Do you acknowledge that there has been progress on social issues of that nature, or what are your particular concerns on that front at the moment?
I suppose we talked about it earlier on, is the kind of we may have made progress on gender equality, but there still is a huge kind of misogynistic kind of component to not just social media, but society in general. Like, and that is the truth. And I mean, like, when we look at the repeal the 8th referendum, and we're nearly 10 years down the line from, we still haven't been able to implement that kind of referendum, the result of that referendum fully. And I think that's down to this kind of, I don't want to say maybe misogynistic, maybe not be, but I still think that the fact that is mainly affecting women means that the political will hasn't been fully there to actually get that over the line. And we're seeing a resurgence of parties that are now looking to turn back on that and basically take the right to choice away from women again.
And we've seen an worrying amount of attacks on women and so forth over the years. Yeah. I mean, isn't social media and the influence, I suppose, of, we'll say, the Andrew Tate factor and so on, isn't that a real problem?
Yeah. But and I'll be the first to admit that it's probably a failure on the part of creators on the left that we haven't been able to get in and get a counter narrative in there to the likes of those creators. I won't name them out for fear of promoting them.
Yeah.
But a lot of their content is extremely toxic and just completely degrading to women. And
it's been watched by young boys in a lot of
Yeah.
cases.
yeah, and we've seen it like we saw with the election of Trump a couple of weeks back. His last week was spent solely going on to these podcasts
Yeah.
and talking and getting in front of young men in
Young
particular.
men, yeah.
And they were, from my knowledge anyway, were very low propensity voters, but they got out in force, and we saw the end result of that.
It was extremely effective, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Are there, just before we get to the last couple of questions, Andrew, are there any other particular policies that you feel you want to highlight here in Roscommon, Galway?
Yeah, so I suppose the healthcare side is one that's fairly kind of close to me anyway, given that Portugal and Ballinasloe, we've seen what happened with the hospital in Roscommon all those years ago. That's one that we have put out a stall no more than with the housing, that we need an NHS-style healthcare system, that we step away from the two-tiered health system and we provide universal access to healthcare for people when they need it. We're at an extremely dangerous point now where we've seen the tragedies that have unfolded down in UHL, and unfortunately those sort of tragedies were going to come about at some stage if we don't address what's going on in the healthcare system now in terms of staff retention and the funding that we need for different services, and also the overspends on the likes of the Children's Hospital. It's just every single day there seems to be stories coming out of hospitals of just these horror stories that are only going to start becoming more prevalent if we don't address the issue right now. And again, no more than with teachers, it's about getting nurses and getting doctors to come back from being abroad and give them an opportunity to work in the healthcare system, where again they have fair paying conditions, they have secure contracts, and they have housing that they're actually able to settle down and know that they have a place to live and a good job to be able to entice them back to work in Ireland.
And from your close proximity to Portiuncula Hospital, how do you think the morale of staff is bearing up there? Given, I mean, all we hear anecdotally about Portiuncula and indeed Galway is of A&E being under pressure, overcrowded, sometimes people sleeping on trolleys and so on, but long delays, no reflection on the staff obviously, but always pressure on the A&E in both those hospitals. So how do you feel the staff are bearing up?
Well, I'm only after about 8 weeks ago, I broke my kneecap and I ruptured my patellar tendon. I actually came down, we were playing a match up in Westport. I decided to come down to Roscommon to the injury unit here. Got into the injury unit within half an hour of my x-rays taken. They were sent off to UHG, and I was in Galway on Sunday night and had my surgery on Monday afternoon. I have absolutely no complaints about the staff that I dealt with the whole way along that process.
Yeah.
They're working extremely hard. They're putting on what I don't want to put words in their mouth either, but it seemed to me to be putting on a brave face. They are under a lot of pressure. I walked into the A&E in UHG, and I knew that I was going to be getting a trolley, or getting onto a trolley or getting into a room at some stage that night. But there were people that were there before me and were probably there long after I got in the trolley that were probably going to be sitting there until the morning. And that's just the problem with capacity. The nurses, doctors, porters, everyone else that makes the hospital run are trying their best. But again, it comes down to how many people are actually doing that job, when we could have more capacity. We could have more workers in there trying to ease the waiting list and ease the timing issues that we have in our hospitals.
Okay, and we've talked about some of your policies and the radical vision that people before profit have, and all the details are on your website. I mean, the Apple funding won't be there forever. I'm just wondering, is everything costed? Is everything viable in your view? Because there seems to be quite a lot of expenditure involved.
Yeah, so you can go on to, along with our manifesto, you can go on, you can see our alternative budget. You can go back and find our alternative budgets for the last couple of years. All the stuff that we've laid out is costed. Again, the Apple, like you said, the Apple money isn't going to cover the costs of everything, but we feel that the burden has been put on low and middle income earners for far too long, and we believe that the wealthy and the super wealthy need to start to pay their fair share. So we've called for the abolishment of USC for anyone earning under €100,000 a year, and we also want to put a 2% tax on millionaires as well. So there are plenty of ways that we can bring the money in, and the government have known this for a long time, but it's about who they're trying to take that tax off is the big thing for us. So we believe that working people have had the burden on them for far too long, and it's time for the people who have earned the most to start paying their way.
Is a difficulty for you as a candidate in rural Ireland that the party is established in urban areas, and maybe its voter base is kind of logically in urban areas to some degree. Is that a fair point?
Absolutely, it is, and it's been borne out in where we've had our successes, like the local elections. We picked up seats, particularly in Dublin. A lot of the candidates around the more rural areas in Ireland didn't fare as well, myself included. But again, I think it's all about getting the message out there. It's just we obviously don't have the political machinery behind us like Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil or Sinn Féin do. We don't have the manpower to go out and canvass in every single area, but that's why we want to. I think we're running someone in every constituency bar Tipperary South, I think. And again, it's about getting the message out there, and it's trying to give people an idea of what we're about. If they're interested, to get in contact with us, see if there's anything that they might want to get involved in. If there's campaigns that people want to get started, we're more than willing to tack onto that and to try and give it more exposure and try and get people behind these movements and campaigns.
Right. What sort of seat target do you think the party has for the forthcoming election?
Realistically, we've been looking for 43 anyway. Out of the, that's a bit, it's a bit too optimistic.
It's a bit ambitious. Yeah.
But look, we want to retain. Obviously, Breach Smith isn't running again this time, but we'd be looking for the seats that we have currently with Paul, Gino, Richard, and Hazel. Norton is the one that's standing in Breach's place. We have another guy, Conor Reddy, in Dublin, that's a great candidate. Look,
you're looking for double figures?
I still think that'd be an unbelievable result for us if we were able to get that.
But you're looking for gains anyway.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's all about just continuing growing. That's what we want to do. And again, like I said, it's great to be able to get seats in county halls and be able to get seats in Dáil Éireann. But at the end of the day, it's about exposure. It's about us getting people mobilised as well.
Yeah,
it's great to get the seats, but we're all about trying to get people mobilised and trying to get them politically active and not just participating in politics every 4 or 5 years when an election comes.
Yeah, like ourselves as Roscommon people power.
Yeah, exactly.
So are you in it for the long haul? Irrespective of the results in the forthcoming election, are you in it for the long haul electorally?
Electorally, yes. Now, again, it's going to be a long time before the next election comes up. So in the meantime, obviously the trade union aspect of my political life is going to be at the forefront of that. Again, like I said, I joined CATU. That's another avenue that I want to try and explore and try to grow, particularly in Ballinasloe. I'm in the Midlands branch now at the minute, but I want to keep involved. Obviously, starting the organising drive in my previous job has lit that fire in me now. And again, I'm still 29, of a long way to go yet. So I do want to stay building there, but it's going to be based in trade unions and getting community action groups to start getting them more active. That's what I want to see more so than anything else. And I think that there is an appetite for that because, again, people are a little bit apathetic when it comes to elections. And I think we need to have that as another facet.
We want to see as many candidates coming forward as possible, and particularly young candidates. I think everybody would approve of that. Mm-hmm. As a sort of a final question, I was going to ask you how you relax. I know very often it's playing rugby, but I think you mentioned the injury, Andrew. I think, and just to clarify, you probably won't be able to do house-to-house canvassing over the coming days. Do you want to explain what happened?
Yeah, so like I said earlier on, I went to go and tackle someone, and
you play for Athlone Rugby Club. No, Ballinasloe, I should say. Ballinasloe, I should say. Yeah.
Look, very unfortunate incident. I clashed knees with someone and fractured the kneecap and did the tendon in. But again, look, it was playing rugby for over 20 years, and that's the first time I've ever broken a bone or torn a ligament or ripped a tendon, so I have to count myself very lucky that I made it that far. I know there are plenty of other people that aren't that lucky when it comes to injuries in sport. But again, the rugby, like the actual playing the rugby itself, is one part of it. The community aspect of the rugby club as well is very important, and we see that up and down the country in GA clubs, rugby clubs, soccer clubs. They're a huge part of the town, and Ballinasloe Rugby Club is basically feels like my home away from home, really. And going up there, we have the bar open and having a few drinks up there with the people that make up that club.
It's needed more than ever now after COVID, because there was a kind of a social disconnect there for a period and still ongoing. So it's important that people get together, isn't it?
Absolutely, and sport's a great way to do that. And like there's connections there that I made in that club that'll stand the test of time. So it is extremely important, and it was a great when we were able to play coming out of COVID. It was great to have that you were able to finally get back together with your old friends and start playing again. And it's a great thing to have. A strong sports club,
Well, we have a thriving rugby scene here with, I said Athlone, but of course Buccaneers and obviously Craig's is a fantastic success story here locally. And we wish you well with Athlone Rugby Club. So Andrew, it's been great chatting to you. And this is Andrew Mannion, who is a candidate in Roscommon, Galway in the general election for People Before Profit. And we wish you the very best of luck in the election campaign, Andrew, and thank you for chatting to us.
Thanks for having me. Much appreciated. Cheers.